In the sweltering summer of 1887, a young woman's dreams shattered at a dusty train platform in Dry Creek. Dr. Eleanor McCrae stepped down from the westbound train, her medical degree fresh in hand, ready to begin a new life. But instead of finding love, she found rejection, deemed too educated to be a proper rancher's wife. The whispers and stares followed her through town, a constant reminder of her place in this unforgiving frontier. Yet among the judging eyes, one man saw something different. Wyatt Callahan, a widowed rancher with his own wounds to heal, watched in silence as she transformed her setback into strength, teaching frontier girls to read beneath the endless western sky. What happens when destiny takes an unexpected turn and love blooms in the most unlikely of places? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The crumpled letter trembled in Eleanor's gloved hands as Thomas Wheeler's words still hung in the dusty air. Too educated for a rancher's wife. She smoothed the wrinkled paper, her letter of introduction that had traveled 2,000 miles, only to be torn in half before her eyes. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the train platform, and Eleanor McCrae, MD, stood precisely where she had been abandoned 10 minutes prior, her leather medical bag at her feet and her trunk of belongings creating an island of propriety amid the scatter of feed sacks and cattle manifests. "Ma'am?" The station master shifted uncomfortably. "Last train east, don't leave till morning. If you're wanting—" "No." Eleanor's voice carried the quiet strength that had seen her through 6 years of medical training. "Thank you, but I won't be requiring a return ticket." From the shadowed edge of the platform, Wyatt Callahan observed the scene with the patient stillness of a man accustomed to reading both cattle and people. The woman's spine remained straight as a fence post, though he'd witnessed Wheeler's brutal dismissal. Something in her bearing reminded him of his late wife, Catherine. That same mix of gentle grace and steel beneath silk. Quite the spectacle, ain't it? Hank Morrison, the mercantile owner, spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. Wheeler had the right of it, though. What kind of woman needs book learning to keep house and raise young'uns? Wyatt's silence was his only response, but his weathered hands tightened imperceptibly on his saddle horn. He watched as the woman, Dr. McCrae, he corrected himself, gathered her dignity around her like a cloak and stepped down from the platform, medical bag clutched close. 6 months of courtship by letter. That's what he'd overheard in Wheeler's angry tirade. 6 months of promises and plans, all undone because the man hadn't bothered to ask what kind of education his intended had pursued. Or perhaps he had, and simply hadn't believed a woman would follow through with such ambitions. The sun caught the copper highlights in her carefully pinned hair as she made her way toward the town's single boarding house. Her Sunday best, a dove-grey traveling suit with tiny pearl buttons, already showed the first dusting of frontier dirt. Yet she moved with purpose, as if this was merely another lesson to be mastered, another challenge to overcome. Wyatt had seen that same determination in the eyes of his daughter Emma last winter, when she'd insisted on learning to break her own horse. He'd taught her, despite the town's whispers about him raising her more like a son than a proper lady. Emma had proven them all wrong, just as he suspected this Dr. McCrae might do, given half a chance. "A woman doctor," old Hank continued, shaking his head. "It ain't natural. Mark my words, she'll be gone by week's end, tail tucked between—" "Reckon that's between her and the Almighty," Wyatt cut in, his quiet words carrying the weight of years spent defending his own unconventional choices. He swung into his saddle, nudging his horse away from the gossip and speculation already spreading like wildfire through the gathering crowd. As he rode past the boarding house, he caught a glimpse of Dr. McCrae through the front window, standing tall before Mrs. Peterson's desk. Even from outside, he could read the boarding house owner's pinched expression. It seemed the good doctor's first battle for acceptance was already beginning. Wyatt turned his horse toward home, where Emma would be waiting with questions about the new arrival. News traveled fast in Dry Creek. He found himself hoping for Reasons he wasn't ready to examine that Dr. Eleanor McCrae was as stubborn as she appeared. The town could use a good shaking up, and perhaps some broken promises were just the beginning of a better story. Eleanor set her worn carpet bag, the one her father had given her upon her acceptance to medical school, on Mrs. Peterson's immaculate counter. The brass clasps, dulled by years of careful use, clinked softly against the polished wood. "We don't ordinarily take in unmarried women." Mrs. Peterson's eyes flickered to the window, where several townspeople still lingered, watching, especially those of uncertain situation. Eleanor's fingers brushed the bag's leather handle, worn smooth by years of carrying medical texts and instruments. Inside lay the tools of her profession: her stethoscope, surgical scissors, and the small kit of medicines she'd carefully packed for her new life, a life that now lay in pieces, like the torn letter in her pocket. "Mrs. Peterson," Eleanor kept her voice steady, professional, the same tone she'd used with skeptical professors and dismissive patients. "I can pay 2 months' rent in advance. I have references from—" "References won't help you here, Miss McCrae." "Doctor," Eleanor corrected gently, "and I understand your concern. But surely—" The boarding-house door opened with a gentle chime, admitting a woman in her late 40s, her grey-streaked hair tucked beneath a practical bonnet. "Martha Peterson, are you turning away a paying guest when you've got 3 empty rooms gathering dust?" Mrs. Peterson's lips thinned. "Sarah Henderson, this is hardly your concern." "The devil it isn't." Sarah's warm brown eyes crinkled at the corners as she smiled at Eleanor. "My Henry's laid up with his back again, and I heard tell we've got a doctor in town. Seems Providence itself brought you to our door, dear." Eleanor felt the first genuine smile of the day touch her lips. "I would be happy to examine Mr. Henderson, Mrs. Henderson." "Sarah, please." She turned to Mrs. Peterson. "I'll vouch for her, Martha, and I'll hear no more nonsense about uncertain situations. The only thing uncertain is how long we'll let small minds dictate to big hearts." A tense silence followed, broken only by the distant whistle of another train and the shuffle of feet on the boardwalk outside. Eleanor stood quietly, her carpet-bag a familiar comfort against her hip. Inside lay not just her medical instruments, but her entire world: a change of clothes, her mother's Bible, and the journal where she recorded her observations and treatments. Everything that defined her, contained in one modest vessel. Finally, Mrs. Peterson sighed. "Room 3, top of the stairs, but any hint of impropriety, you'll find none." Eleanor reached for her purse. "And I would be grateful if you could have my trunk brought up from the station. I'll pay extra, of course." As she followed Sarah Henderson up the narrow stairs, Eleanor caught a glimpse of movement through the window. Wyatt Callahan rode past. On his dark bay horse, his daughter, a girl of perhaps 12, riding beside him. Their eyes met briefly, and Eleanor saw in his nod something that had been rare in her life: simple acknowledgement, unmarred by judgment. "Don't mind Martha," Sarah said as they reached the landing. "She means well, but change comes hard to some." "Folks, now about Henry's back," Eleanor smiled, already reaching for her carpet-bag. Here, at least, was familiar ground. Here was work she understood, a way to begin building a new foundation from the ruins of her plans. "Tell me about his symptoms, and I'll see what I can do." She followed Sarah to her new room, the bag's weight against her side, a reminder that, while some dreams might shatter, others endured, sturdy and practical as the leather that contained them. The dog-eared primer lay open on Eleanor's lap, its pages worn soft with generations of eager fingers. She'd found it at the bottom of her trunk, tucked between her medical texts, a reminder of her own first steps into education. Now, sitting on the boarding house's narrow porch, she watched a group of young girls playing hopscotch in the dusty street, their sunbonnets swinging with each jump. No schooling past 10 years old, Sarah Henderson had told her that morning, after Eleanor had successfully treated Henry's back. Boys work the ranches, girls learn cooking and mending. That's the way of things here. The way of things. Eleanor's fingers traced the primer's faded alphabet. She'd heard those words too often in her life, usually preceding some new barrier. To be overcome. The way of things had nearly kept her from medical school. The way of things had brought her west to a man who couldn't accept her mind along with her hand. Perhaps it was time to change the way of things. Miss, a small voice drew her attention. One of the hopscotch players, a girl with sun-freckled cheeks and determined eyes, stood before her. What's that book about? Reading, mathematics, and the wonders of the world, Eleanor replied, noting the spark of interest in the child's gaze. Would you like to see? Pa says reading's not for ranch folk. The girl twisted her apron strings. But sometimes I peek at Emma Callahan's books when she ain't looking. She knows all sorts of things. Emma Callahan. Eleanor remembered the quiet girl who'd ridden past with Wyatt. That'd be my daughter. The deep voice startled them both. Wyatt Callahan stood at the edge of the porch, his broad-brimmed hat shadowing, eyes that held a glimmer of amusement. Been teaching her since her mama passed. Done what I could, but reckon there's gaps in her learning. Eleanor stood, the primer clutched to her chest like a shield. Mr. Callahan, I didn't expect. Call me Wyatt. He gestured to the book. Town council's meeting tonight. Might be worth mentioning that primer of yours. The council? Eleanor's mind raced with possibilities. Are they seeking a teacher? Ain't seeking anything. His smile held a hint of challenge. But sometimes folks don't know what they need till it's right in front of them. The sun was setting behind him, painting the sky in shades of promise. Eleanor thought of the girls in the street, of Emma Callahan and her borrowed books, of all the minds waiting to be opened like fresh pages. Would you... She hesitated, then squared her shoulders. Would you speak for me, Mr. Callahan, at the council? Wyatt, he corrected again, gentle but firm. And no, ma'am, reckon you can speak for yourself just fine. But I'll make sure they... Listen. The girl with the sun-freckled cheeks had edged closer to the primer, her eyes fixed on its pages. Eleanor made a decision. Would you like to learn your letters? Jenny, the girl supplied. Jenny Wheeler. She must have seen Eleanor's start of surprise because she added quickly, Uncle Thomas is mean sometimes, but Pa says I got Mama's quick mind. Wyatt's expression darkened at Thomas Wheeler's name, but his voice remained steady. Might be time this town remembered there's more than one way to build a life out here. He touched the brim of his hat. Council meets at 7, Dr. McCrae. Might want to bring that primer of yours. As he walked away, Eleanor looked down at Jenny Wheeler's eager face, then out at the other girls who had stopped their game to watch. The primer's weight in her hands felt like possibility. Jenny, she said softly, would you and your friends like to learn a story before dinner? The girls gathered around her like birds to scattered grain, and Eleanor opened the primer to its first page. As she began to read, she felt something settle in her heart, not the end of a dream, but perhaps the beginning of a better one. And if she caught Wyatt Callahan pausing at the corner to watch, a proud smile touching his lips as his own daughter slipped into the crowd of listeners, well, that was just another piece of the story beginning to unfold. The makeshift slate, propped against the old oak tree, caught the morning light, its rough-hewn surface covered in careful chalk letters. Eleanor had traded her medical bag for a piece of limestone and a length of string, transforming the grassy area behind the boarding house into what she hoped would become Dry Creek's first proper classroom for girls. Ain't natural holding school outdoors. Martha Peterson's voice drifted from her open window, like some kind of gypsy camp. But Eleanor noticed the plate of fresh biscuits that had appeared on the back step, still warm from the oven. Actions spoke louder than words out here in the West. That much she'd learned already. The capital of Wyoming Territory is... Eleanor paused, watching her students' faces scrunch in concentration. 8 girls sat on blankets in the grass, including Emma Callahan and Jenny Wheeler. Each held a small piece of slate, salvaged from the abandoned mine outside town, Cheyenne. Emma's quiet voice carried surprising conviction. She'd inherited her father's steady confidence, though her eyes held a hunger for knowledge that reminded Eleanor of herself at that age. "Very good, Emma." Eleanor smiled, then turned back to the larger slate. "Now who can tell me why Wyoming Territory is particularly special for women?" A shuffle of boots on gravel interrupted the lesson. Thomas Wheeler stood at the edge of the yard, his face dark with disapproval. "Jenny, what do you think you're doing out here?" The girl clutched her slate piece tighter. "Learning about our territory, Uncle Thomas. Did you know women can vote here and own property too?" Filling their heads with nonsense, Thomas spat into the dust. "Sister-in-law's been too soft on you since your pa passed. Time you learned proper women's work." Eleanor set down her chalk, dust coating her fingers like fine powder. "Mr. Wheeler, your niece shows remarkable aptitude for—" "Didn't ask you, Doctor." He sneered the title. "Still trying to prove you're better than the rest of us common folk?" "No, sir." Wyatt Callahan's quiet voice carried across the yard. He'd appeared like a shadow, leading his horse. "Reckon she's just trying to make us better than we are." The other girls had drawn closer together, but Emma sat straight-backed, her father's presence lending her courage. Jenny's eyes darted between her uncle and her friend, the small slate trembling in her hands. Thomas Wheeler's face reddened. "This isn't over. Jenny, home, now!" But before Jenny could move, Sarah Henderson emerged from her back door, wiping flour from her hands. "Why, Thomas Wheeler, what perfect timing! I was just about to send for you." Her cheerful voice held steel beneath its sugar. "Henry's back is troubling him something fierce, and Dr. McCrae here mentioned a new treatment, since you're so concerned. With proper work, maybe you'd like to help move him." Thomas backed away, mumbling excuses. Sarah's smile never wavered. "No? Well then, I'm sure you won't mind if Jenny stays to finish her lessons. A girl needs to know how to read contracts and banknotes these days, especially one who'll inherit her father's share of the Wheeler Ranch." The reminder of Jenny's inheritance and her uncle's temporary stewardship of it hit home. Thomas retreated, though his glare promised future trouble. Eleanor released a breath she hadn't known she was holding. The chalk dust on her fingers reminded her of hospital powder, of all the battles she'd fought to earn her place in medicine. Now here she was, fighting new battles with the same weapons, knowledge, patience, and the quiet determination to make change one mind at a time. "Got something for you." Wyatt's voice drew her attention. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a smooth piece of wood about the size of her medical bag. "Emma mentioned you were using an old slate. Thought this might serve better." The board was sanded perfectly smooth, its surface treated with some kind of dark stain that would show chalk clearly. It even had a small ledge at the bottom to hold chalk and a leather strap for hanging. "Mr. Callahan." Eleanor ran her fingers over the smooth surface, feeling the care in its crafting. "This must have taken hours." "Wyatt," he corrected, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. "And anything worth doing takes time." His eyes met hers, holding a warmth that had nothing to do with the morning sun. "Might want to add that to your lessons." As he rode away, Eleanor hung the board in place of the old slate. Her students gathered around, admiring its gleaming surface. "Are we really going to learn about contracts?" Jenny asked, hope warring, with uncertainty in her voice. Eleanor picked up her chalk, its familiar weight now a promise instead of a defense. "We're going to learn everything you need to know to make your own choices in this world." She began to write, her letters clear and strong against the dark wood. "Now, who can tell me what suffrage means?" Eleanor's doctor's bag sat in the corner of her room, untouched since Henry Henderson's back treatment. The brass clasps had gathered a thin film of dust, like her medical dreams. But when Emma Callahan's screams split the quiet afternoon air, Eleanor's hands remembered their purpose before her mind could doubt. She burst onto the boarding house porch, medical bag already in hand. A crowd had gathered near the general store, where Emma lay crumpled beside a spooked horse, her face white with pain. Wyatt knelt beside her, his usual composure shattered by fear. "Don't move her," Eleanor called, authority replacing hesitation. In her voice, The crowd parted, though she heard the whispers, "Woman doctor, too educated, not natural. She was helping me unload supplies." Wyatt's voice was rough with worry. "Horse spooked at a rattler. She hit the ground hard." Eleanor knelt. In the dust, her dove-grey skirts forgotten. "Emma, can you hear me?" The girl's eyes flickered open, glazed with pain. "I need to examine you. Your father's right here." "Shouldn't we wait for Doc Matthews?" someone called. "He's only up in Preston. That's 4 hours' ride." Wyatt snapped. "My daughter needs help now." Eleanor was already opening her bag, its familiar contents grounding her. The stethoscope, the small bottles of medicine, the clean bandages, each had its place, each held its purpose. Her fingers found Emma's pulse, strong but racing. "Can you tell me where it hurts most?" she asked softly. Left side," Emma gasped. "When I breathe." Eleanor's gentle hands found the telltale creak of broken ribs, but it was the rapid, shallow breathing, and the way Emma's lips had taken on a bluish tinge that concerned her most. "She needs surgery," Eleanor said quietly to Wyatt. "The rib has punctured her lung. If we don't release the pressure—" She let the sentence hang. Wyatt's face was carved from stone, but his eyes held absolute trust. "What do you need?" "Clean table, hot water, my instruments sterilized, and help holding her still." Eleanor's mind was already racing through the procedure she'd performed twice during her residency. "Mrs. Henderson's kitchen would be best." "Like—" "Hell, you're cutting on that child!" Thomas Wheeler pushed forward. "This is what comes of letting women above their station. First teaching, now playing at Dr. Enough." Wyatt's voice could have frozen flame. "My daughter, my choice." He gathered Emma in his arms with infinite gentleness. "Lead the way, Doctor." Sarah Henderson already had her kitchen table cleared when they arrived, kettle steaming on the stove. She'd heard enough of Eleanor's medical discussions with Henry to know what might be needed. Eleanor laid out her instruments, the silver gleaming in the afternoon light. Each one held memories, lectures on proper technique, hours of practice. Lives saved and lost, now they represented Emma's best chance. "I'll need to make an incision," she explained to Wyatt as she scrubbed her hands with carbolic soap, "to release the air pressing on her lung. It will look worse than it is, but you must hold her still." His nod was all the permission she needed. Eleanor's hands moved with practiced precision, finding the space between ribs, making the careful "a cut." Emma whimpered but didn't cry out, her father's daughter to the bone. The soft hiss of escaping air brought color back to Emma's lips. Eleanor worked quickly, placing the drain, stitching with neat, tiny sutures. Her world narrowed to the rhythm of needle and thread, to the steady rise and fall of Emma's breathing as it eased into normal patterns. When she finally straightened, her back aching and her hands cramping, the kitchen was full of silent watchers. Martha Peterson stood beside Sarah Henderson, both women's faces bearing identical expressions of awe. Even Thomas Wheeler lingered in the doorway, his earlier bluster silenced by the evidence of skill before him. "She'll need rest," Eleanor said, her voice hoarse, "and careful watching for infection, but she'll heal clean with minimal scarring." Wyatt hadn't moved from his daughter's side, his large hand engulfing her smaller one. But his eyes, when they met Eleanor's, held something that made her breath catch, a recognition deeper than gratitude, warmer than respect. Eleanor began cleaning her instruments, each one returning to its proper place in her bag. The familiar motions helped steady her trembling hands. She hadn't realized how much she'd missed this. Not just the medicine, but the certainty of knowing exactly who she was and what she could offer. "Thank you," Wyatt said softly, "Dr. McCrae." And in those 3 words, Eleanor heard the change begin. The photograph was faded at the edges, its silver surface dulled by years of handling. Eleanor found it while changing Emma's bandages, tucked beneath the girl's pillow like a talisman. A beautiful woman with Emma's determined chin sat straight-backed on a wooden chair, her hand resting on a much younger Wyatt's shoulder. "That's my mama," Emma said softly, following Eleanor's gaze. "She was a teacher too before she came west. Papa says that's where I get my bookish ways from." Eleanor carefully set aside the fresh bandages. 3 days had passed since the surgery, and Emma was healing well, though confined to bed. "Would you like to tell me about her?" "Catherine." Wyatt's voice came from the doorway, surprising them both. Her name was Catherine. He moved into the room with the fluid grace that never failed to catch Eleanor's attention. "She taught me to read proper when we first married. Said a man wasn't fully grown till he could read his own contracts." The corner of his mouth lifted in a sad smile as he took the photograph, his calloused thumb tracing its edge with familiar reverence. "Fever took her 6 years back. Town had no doctor then. By the time we got her to Preston," he let the words fade, but Eleanor heard their weight. She'd seen too many cases where time made the difference between life and death, where distance became the enemy of healing. "She would have liked you," Emma declared, with the simple certainty of youth. "She believed in fighting for what's right, even when people said it wasn't proper." Wyatt's eyes met Eleanor's over their daughter's head. "That she did." He carefully returned the photograph to its place beneath Emma's pillow. "Taught me that sometimes the proper thing and the right thing ain't always the same. Like having a lady doctor," Emma asked innocently, though her eyes held a glimmer of mischief. "Like having exactly the doctor we needed," Wyatt corrected, his voice gentle but firm. "How are those ribs feeling, sweetheart?" Eleanor checked the bandages one final time, using the familiar medical routine to steady her suddenly racing heart. "The drainage is clean, and her breathing is much stronger. Another week of rest, and she should be ready for gentle activity." "A week?" Emma's face fell. "But what about my lessons?" "Well," Eleanor smiled, reaching for the primer she'd taken. "To carrying in her medical bag, I suppose we could combine your rest with some reading. If your father approves. Reckon learning never hurt anyone who wasn't dead set against it." Wyatt settled into the room's single chair, his long legs stretched out comfortably. "Might even stay and learn a thing or two myself." The afternoon light softened the hard edges of the bedroom, creating a gentle space where past and present seemed to meet. As Eleanor began to read, she felt Catherine's photograph watching over them all, a quiet witness to this new kind of healing, where medicine and learning twined together like twin streams feeding the same river. And if Wyatt's hand brushed hers when she passed him the primer, and if his fingers lingered a moment longer than necessary, well, perhaps Catherine would have approved of that too. After all, she'd taught him that the right thing wasn't always the proper thing. Outside, the whispers of Dry Creek continued their endless dance. But here in this room, with Emma's bright eyes and Wyatt's steady presence, Eleanor found herself caring less and less about proper. She cared only about right, and this somehow felt more right than anything had since she'd stepped off that westbound train. The rain-soaked shawl clung to Eleanor's shoulders as she hurried across the muddy street, medical bag clutched protectively against her chest. The summer storm had blown in without warning, turning Dry Creek's dusty streets into rivers of red clay. Lightning split the sky, followed by thunder that rattled the false fronts of every building on Main Street. "Dr. McCrae," Wyatt's voice carried over the wind. He stood in the doorway of the Mercantile, his usual composed manner touched with urgent concern. "Get inside before this gets worse." She didn't argue, letting him draw her into the shelter of the store. Water dripped from her hem, forming a puddle on the plank floor. The shawl, Sarah Henderson's, borrowed in haste, had done little to protect her from the deluge. "Thought I'd check on Mrs. Miller's baby," she explained, pushing wet hair from her face. "The cough was worrying me. Been watching you make your rounds." Wyatt's admission was quiet, almost lost in the storm's fury. "Seen you checking on Emma's friends, their families, building trust, one house call at a time." Eleanor wrung out the shawl, buying time to steady her voice. "Trust is earned out here, isn't it? Like everything else. Some things are given freely." His eyes held hers, serious in the storm-dark shop. When they're deserved, the empty Mercantile felt suddenly intimate, lit only by a single lamp and occasional flashes of lightning. Mr. Morrison had clearly fled home before the worst hit, leaving them alone among the barrels of flour and hanging tools. "Emma's healing well," Eleanor said, reaching for safer ground. She'll be ready to rejoin the other girls soon. Been meaning to thank you proper for that." Wyatt moved to the pot-bellied stove, adding wood with practiced hands. "Not just for saving her life, for giving her something to live toward." Heat bloomed in the store's close air. Eleanor set her medical bag aside, drawn to the stove's warmth. "She reminds me of myself at that age, so hungry to learn, to prove herself worthy of dreams that others called impossible, like becoming a doctor." His voice held no judgment, only genuine curiosity. "My father supported me, thank God. But others—" She smiled wryly. "Well, you've heard Thomas Wheeler's opinions on educated women. Wheeler's a fool." The words held quiet steel. "Man can't see past his own shadow to recognize light when it's shining right in front of him." Thunder crashed overhead, making the windows rattle. Eleanor jumped slightly, and Wyatt's hand found her elbow, steadying her. The touch, though brief, sent warmth through her that had nothing to do with the stove. "I watched you with Emma," he said softly. "Saw how your hands never shook, how you knew exactly what to do. Made me think about Catherine, about how things might have been different if we'd had someone like you here then." Wyatt, his name felt different on her tongue now, weighted with understanding and something more. "You can't change the past." "No." He turned to face her fully, his eyes reflecting the lamplight. "But sometimes the past teaches us to recognize what's precious when we find it again." The storm raged outside, but in here time seemed to slow. Eleanor became acutely aware of every detail. The scent of wood smoke and wet wool, the steady drip of water from her hem, the way Wyatt's presence seemed to fill the space without crowding it. "I should check the roof." He moved toward the back room. "Store's old, might need—" A tremendous crash from above cut off his words. Before Eleanor could react, Wyatt pulled her away from the center of the room, as a section of ceiling gave way, bringing a torrent of water with it. They ended up pressed against the counter, Eleanor sheltered by Wyatt's body, both breathing hard. The rain poured through the new hole, but they were safe in their corner, closer than they'd ever been. "Are you all right?" His voice was rough with concern. "Yes," she whispered, though her heart was racing for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. "Thanks to your quick thinking." He didn't step away immediately. Instead, his hand came up to brush a strand of wet hair from her cheek, the gesture achingly gentle. "Eleanor." The store's bell jangled as the door flew open, admitting a gust of wind and Thomas Wheeler's suspicious face. "Well, well, what do we have here?" Wyatt's expression hardened, but his voice remained steady. "A doctor and a concerned citizen dealing with storm damage. Got a problem with that, Wheeler?" The moment was broken, but something had shifted between them as inevitable as the storm itself. Eleanor straightened her spine, letting her wet shawl become a mantle of dignity. Sometimes, she was learning, the most powerful changes came not in thunder, but in quiet moments between the lightning strikes. The unopened envelope sat on Eleanor's small writing desk, her father's precise handwriting stark against the cream-colored. In paper, it had arrived with the morning stage, carrying the weight of Boston society in its expensive thickness. Eleanor traced the embossed return address with one finger, remembering the grand house on Beacon Hill, where she'd grown up dreaming of a different kind of life. A knock at her door provided welcome interruption. "Come in." Sarah Henderson entered, carrying a fresh-baked pie. "Thought you might need this, dear. Saw the Boston postmark when the stage brought your letter." Eleanor smiled, grateful for the older woman's perceptive kindness. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to those who've faced similar choices." Sarah set the pie down, its apple cinnamon scent filling the room. "Though I only moved from Missouri to Wyoming, Boston to Dry Creek, that's quite a leap. I've been avoiding opening it." Eleanor picked up the envelope. "Father supported my medical studies, but this—" She gestured to encompass her small room, the town beyond. "Teaching frontier children, building a practice from scratch." It wasn't exactly what he envisioned for his only daughter. And what did he envision? A position at the Women's Hospital in Boston. A marriage to someone suitable, The memory of Thomas Wheeler's rejection stung less now, transformed by time and unexpected discoveries. He'd secured a place for me. All I had to do was come home. Sarah's keen eyes took in the medical bag by the door, the slate propped against the wall with tomorrow's lessons carefully chalked. "Seems to me you're already home, unless I'm missing something." Through the open window came the sound of children playing, Emma Callahan's clear voice leading a spelling game. In the distance, a horse's whinny that Eleanor would know anywhere. Wyatt, probably returning from his morning rounds. "No," Eleanor said softly. "You're not missing anything." She broke the seal on the envelope, unfolding the thick pages within. Her father's words were kind but urgent. The position at the hospital was still open, but they needed an answer soon. Her mother missed her. The medical community in Boston remembered her promise. "He's offering everything I thought I wanted." Eleanor set the letter down. A real hospital. Colleagues who wouldn't question my credentials. A chance to prove myself in the city where I trained. But last week I delivered Mrs. Johnson's baby in a cabin 12 miles from town. Yesterday I taught Jenny Wheeler about bone structure using a skeleton I drew on the slate. This morning I checked Emma's ribs and discussed Shakespeare with her father. Eleanor's voice grew stronger with each example. "I'm not just practicing medicine here or just teaching. I'm building something that matters." Sarah nodded, her smile knowing. "And does Wyatt Callahan factor into this building project of yours?" He touched Eleanor's cheeks. "Sarah, don't Sarah me, young lady. I've seen how he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching, like a man who's remembered what hope feels like." The letter seemed lighter now, less threatening. Eleanor picked up her pen, drawing a fresh sheet of paper from her desk. "Would you like to stay for pie while I write my reply? Only if you'll tell me what you're going to say." Eleanor dipped her pen in ink, her hand steady as she began to write. "That I'm grateful for the opportunity, but I've found my purpose. That sometimes the grandest dreams come true in the smallest places. That I've learned more about healing, people, hearts, communities in these few months than in all my years of formal training." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "That I've met someone who sees me, not just my degree or my family name. Someone who understands that dreams don't always wear fancy clothes or speak in cultured accents." "And?" Sarah prompted gently. "And that I'm home." Eleanor's smile held the certainty she'd been seeking since stepping off that train. "Tell me, Sarah, does that sound terribly unwise? Sounds like the kind of wisdom they don't teach in fancy Boston schools." Sarah cut 2 generous slices of pie, the kind that knows its own mind and its own heart. Outside, the Wyoming sky stretched endless and blue, full of possibility. Eleanor's letter to Boston would go out on tomorrow's stage, carrying not regret, but recognition. Sometimes she was learning the bravest choice wasn't in leaving, but in choosing to stay. The dance card dangled from Eleanor's wrist by its faded blue ribbon, a relic of her Boston seasons pressed into new service at Dry Creek's harvest celebration. The makeshift dance floor, planks laid over the meeting house's packed earth floor, and gleamed with beeswax and promise in the lamplight. "You look beautiful, Dr. McCrae." Emma Callahan, resplendent in her first grown-up dress, beamed at her teacher, like a lady in a storybook. Eleanor smoothed her best silk dress, saved from her trunk for special occasions. The deep blue fabric caught the light like water, making her feel both overdressed and perfectly right for this moment of community celebration. "Your father helped organize all this?" Eleanor asked, watching Wyatt direct the placement of additional lanterns. He'd shed his usual working clothes for a clean black suit that fit his broad shoulders like it was made for him. "Papa says harvest dance is tradition." Emma's eyes sparkled with shared secrets, though he's never insisted on proper dancing lessons before this year. The band, 3 local ranchers with fiddles and a piano borrowed from the church, struck up a waltz. Eleanor watched the dancers sweep past, women's skirts brushing the fresh-laid boards. Sarah Henderson winked as she whirled by in her husband's arms, Henry's back troubles forgotten in the music's embrace. Miss McCrae. Thomas Wheeler's voice cut through the festive atmosphere. Might I have this dance? Eleanor's fingers tightened. On her dance card. Mr. Wheeler, Now Thomas, Sarah Henderson had materialized beside them, slightly breathless from dancing. Surely you saw Dr. McCrae's card is full. Why, Wyatt Callahan claimed the first dance last week. Thomas's face darkened. Did he now? Interesting, given how he's barely danced since Catherine, and yet here I am. Wyatt's quiet voice carried authority without raising its volume. He stood behind Eleanor, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. Ready to claim that dance, if the lady's willing. Eleanor turned to face him, her heart beating in time with the music. I'd be honored, Mr. Callahan. His hand at her waist was sure but gentle as he led her onto the floor. They moved together as if they'd danced 1,000 times before, finding their rhythm in the space between one breath and the next. Never thanked you proper, Wyatt said softly, for that letter you sent east. Eleanor missed a step. How did you? Word travels, especially when Thomas Wheeler makes it his business to spread it. His hand steadied her through the turn. Could have. Had a fine position in Boston. Safety, respectability. I have respect here. Eleanor met his eyes, from those whose opinions matter. The lantern light caught the silver at his temples, the laugh lines around his eyes that appeared so rarely. You have more than that, Eleanor. You have people who need you, children who look up to you. He paused, his hand tightening slightly at her waist. A man who's been trying to find the right words to tell you what you mean to him and his daughter. The music swelled around them, but Eleanor heard only the quiet sincerity in his voice. And has he found those words? He's working on it. Wyatt's smile held promise. Though some things are better shown than told. From the corner of her eye, Eleanor saw Emma watching them, hope bright on her young face. Jenny Wheeler stood beside her, both girls clutching their own dance cards with dreams of future harvests. It won't be easy, Eleanor said softly. There are those in town who still think a woman doctor is against nature's law, who believe teaching girls more than basic letters is asking for trouble. Good thing I've got some experience with trouble. Wyatt's thumb brushed across her knuckles where their hands joined. And with recognizing what's worth fighting for. The dance ended too soon, but Wyatt didn't release her hand immediately. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper. Been meaning to give you this? Seems fitting tonight of all nights. Eleanor unwrapped it carefully. Inside lay a new dance card, crafted from tooled leather with her name worked into the design. But it was the words beneath her name that made her breath catch. Dr. Eleanor McCrae, physician and teacher, Dry Creek, Wyoming Territory. Ordered it special from Cheyenne, Wyatt said quietly. Figured if you're staying, you should have something that shows both sides of who you are, who you've chosen to be. Eleanor ran her fingers over the careful tooling, feeling the permanence of it. Like the town itself, it was both practical and beautiful, crafted with care and meant to last. Thank you, she whispered, and they both knew she meant more than the gift. Dr. McCrae! Jenny Wheeler's voice carried across the floor. You promised to show us the Virginia reel. Eleanor smiled up at Wyatt. Duty calls. It usually does. He offered his arm. Shall we show these youngsters how it's done? As they joined the forming lines, Eleanor felt the weight of her new dance card against her wrist, solid and real as the future it promised. The music began again, and with it, the next dance in a pattern they were creating together, step by careful step. The medical journal lay open on Eleanor's desk, its pages filled with her careful notations of the winter's cases. Influenza had swept through Dry Creek like a prairie fire, testing both her skills and the town's resilience. Her neat handwriting documented each patient, each treatment, each small victory and bitter loss. Fevers broken on the Morrison children, she wrote, dipping her pen in fresh ink. Sarah Henderson's willow bark tea, combined with regular doses of quinine, proves effective. Must remember to document the proportions for future reference. A knock at her door interrupted her writing. Wyatt stood in the entrance, snow dusting his shoulders. Got word from the Watson place. Their youngest took sick in the night. Eleanor was already reaching for her medical bag. How's the pass? Treacherous, which is why I brought this. He held up a second coat, thick wool, lined with sheepskin. Catherine's been saving it, thinking it might be needed someday. The coat's weight settled on her shoulders like a blessing. Wyatt, I can't. You can and you will. His voice was gentle but firm. Can't have our only doctor freezing before she reaches her patient. The word our warmed her more than any goat could. Since the harvest dance 2 months ago, their courtship had progressed with the careful deliberation of two people who understood the weight of second chances. Every shared moment, every quiet conversation, built something stronger than mere romance. The school, she began, but Sarah Henderson appeared in the doorway as if summoned. I'll mind your girls today, Sarah said, taking Eleanor's slate, though I make no promises about my geometry lessons. Outside, the winter wind howled across the prairie, driving snow into steep drifts against the buildings. Eleanor recorded one last note in her journal. Community support essential to medical practice. Traditional knowledge, SH, proves invaluable. The ride to the Watson Ranch tested every bit of Eleanor's determination. Wyatt led the way, finding paths through snow deep enough to swallow a horse's legs. The coat proved its worth, keeping her warm despite the bitter wind. Reminds me of the winter we lost Catherine, Wyatt said suddenly, his voice barely carrying over the wind. Storm like this, but no doctor within 50 miles. By the time the weather cleared, Eleanor urged her horse alongside his. You can't change the past, Wyatt. No. He turned to look at her, snow catching in his beard. But you're changing the future. Every day, with every child you teach and every life you save, watching you work, seeing how you never give up. It's given this town something we didn't know we were missing. Hope, she said softly, understanding. The hope that comes from knowing help is near. They crested a rise, and the Watson Ranch appeared through the swirling snow. Smoke rose from the chimney, a good sign. Where there was heat, there was hope. Eleanor dismounted, her medical bag secure in Catherine's coat pocket. Her journal would later record the next 6 hours in clinical terms. Childhood pneumonia, steam treatments, careful monitoring. But it couldn't capture the way the Watson family worked together under her direction, heating water and stripping eucalyptus leaves, or how Wyatt's steady presence kept her grounded through the worst moments, when young Timothy's breathing finally eased, when his fever broke like the sun through storm clouds. Eleanor sank into a kitchen chair, exhausted but triumphant. Mrs. Watson pressed a cup of coffee into her hands, its warmth seeping into her bones. Don't know what we'd have done without you, Dr. McCrae, Mr. Watson said gruffly. Time was. Losing children to winter illness was just the way of things. Not anymore, Wyatt said, his hand finding Eleanor's shoulder. Not while we have her. The storm had settled into gentle snowfall by the time they rode home. Eleanor's journal waited on her desk, ready to receive the day's events in careful medical notation. But some things, she knew, couldn't be captured in writing. The trust in a parent's eyes, the warmth of a community coming together, the way Wyatt's hand had steadied her through the worst moments. I'll check on Timothy tomorrow, she said as they reached the boarding house. The first day after fever breaks is crucial. I know. Wyatt helped her dismount, his hands lingering at her waist. Because you've taught us all to understand these things, to fight back against what we once thought unchangeable. Eleanor touched the collar of Catherine's coat, feeling the connection between past and present, between what was lost and what had been found. We'll make it through this winter, she said with quiet certainty. Together. Her journal's final entry that night was brief but telling. Weather severe but spirits high, community strong, hope like healing comes in many forms. The pressed wildflower, a first prairie crocus of spring, marked the page in Eleanor's primer where her students had begun their poetry lessons. Its delicate purple petals, preserved between the pages, reminded her of that morning's discovery. Emma and Jenny kneeling in the newly thawed earth behind the schoolhouse, carefully gathering the brave blooms. "Look, Dr. McCrae," Jenny had called out. "Life coming back, just like you taught us about cycles and seasons." Now, as afternoon sun warmed the schoolroom, Eleanor watched her students bend over their slates, crafting verses about renewal and hope. The winter's trials had changed them all, not just in their understanding of science and medicine, but in their grasp of life's precious fragility. "When spring comes calling," Emma read aloud, her voice clear and confident, "we answer with green dreams and purple promises." "That's lovely, Emma." Eleanor smiled, noting how the girl had grown over the past months. "Who else would like to share?" A shadow darkened the doorway. "Quite the waste of time, ain't it? Poetry and flowers, when there's real work to be done." Thomas Wheeler's voice carried the last bite of winter's chill. But Eleanor noticed something new, how her students straightened their spines instead of shrinking away, how Jenny met her uncle's gaze without flinching. "Uncle Thomas," Jenny said, holding up her slate, "I wrote about the medicines Dr. McCrae showed us how to make. Would you like to hear?" Thomas's face reddened. Time was, girls knew their place. "Time changes," Wyatt's quiet voice came from behind him. He stepped into the schoolroom carrying something wrapped in brown paper. "Like seasons, like minds, if we let them." Eleanor's heart quickened at his presence, as it always did. Since their shared trials during the winter epidemic, their relationship had deepened into something the whole town recognized, even if it remained unspoken. "Got something for your classroom," Wyatt continued, deliberately turning his back on Thomas. He unwrapped the package, revealing a carefully crafted wooden box with small compartments. "For storing those healing herbs you've been teaching about. Thought medicine and learning might as well grow together." Eleanor touched the box's smooth surface, feeling the care in its making. "It's perfect. The girls can label each section, practice their writing while they learn the properties of each plant." "Filling their heads with doctor's nonsense," Thomas spat. "Jenny, get your things. Time you learned proper women's work from your aunt." But Jenny stood her ground, another winter-forged change. "My father left me his share of the ranch, Uncle Thomas. Reckon I need to learn everything I can about running. Numbers for accounts, writing for contracts, medicine for the animals and hands." Eleanor held her breath, watching the battle of wills. She saw the moment Thomas recognized his defeat in the set of Jenny's jaw. Catherine's determination, living on in her niece. "Your father was a fool," he said, but the words lacked their usual venom. "Leaving a ranch to a girl." "No," Wyatt spoke up. "He saw what you're finally seeing now. That strength ain't about what's proper, but what's right." Thomas turned away, but paused in the doorway. "Mind she learns proper bookkeeping then. Ranch accounts won't keep themselves." He left before anyone could respond, but his words hung in the air like the promise of thaw after frost. Eleanor looked at her students' shining faces, at the precious wildflower marking their progress, at Wyatt's gift combining medicine and learning. Spring had brought more than just new growth to Dry Creek. "Well," she said, opening the herb box, "shall we begin our lesson on healing plants? Jenny, you can take notes for your ranch ledger. Emma, perhaps you'll write us another poem about the properties of yarrow." The girls eagerly gathered around as Eleanor began her lesson, their slates clicking softly against Wyatt's box. He remained by the door, watching with that quiet smile that never failed to warm her heart. "Might want to press a flower for this. On page 2, he suggested softly. "Mark the day things started changing for real." Eleanor touched the dried crocus in her primer, thinking of cycles and seasons, of endings and beginnings. "Some changes have been growing all along," she said, "like spring beneath the snow, just waiting for the right moment to bloom." The afternoon light caught the first green buds on the tree outside her schoolroom window. Within the wooden box, space waited for new healing herbs. And in her heart, another kind of promise stirred, as fresh and hopeful as the season itself. The telegram's yellow paper crackled in Eleanor's hands, its terse words stark against the morning light. Mother gravely ill. Stop, Boston Women's Hospital. Position still open. Stop. Come home immediately. Stop. Father, stop. She stood in the telegraph office, the familiar scent of ink and paper now tinged with the bitter taste of choice. Through the window, she could see her students gathering for their morning lessons, Jenny Wheeler helping Emma lay out the herb samples they'd collected yesterday. "Bad news, Dr. McCrae?" The telegraph operator, Mr. Collins, asked softly. He'd been one of her first allies in town after she'd treated his wife's difficult pregnancy. "My mother is ill." The words felt strange in her mouth, as if speaking them made the distance between Boston and Wyoming suddenly vast and uncrossable. "And my father wants you back east." Mr. Collins nodded, understanding. "Heard tell they've been holding a fine position for you. One of them big hospitals." Eleanor touched the telegram's crisp edge. "The Women's Hospital of Boston, where I trained, where everything was ordered, predictable, proper. Where she wouldn't have to fight for respect with every diagnosis, wouldn't have to teach medicine alongside multiplication tables." The door chimed, and Wyatt stepped in, snowmelt dampening his boots. One look at her face told him everything. "When did it arrive?" "Just now." She held out the telegram, watching as he read the few spare lines that threatened to unravel everything they'd built. "Your mother," he said quietly. "How serious?" "I don't know. Father wouldn't have sent for me unless—" She trailed off, remembering her mother's gentle hands guiding her first stitches, teaching her that healing began with compassion. "I have to go." "Course you do." His voice held no judgment, only understanding that somehow made it harder. "Question is, are you coming back?" The telegraph key clicked in the background, its rhythm like a heartbeat marking time. Through the window, Eleanor watched Sarah Henderson hurry toward the schoolhouse, ready to take over classes as she had during the winter crisis. The town had learned to adapt, to support its doctor-teacher in all her roles. The position there, holding, Wyatt continued, "it's everything you trained for, everything you dreamed of before I stepped off a train and found everything I never knew I needed." Eleanor's voice caught. "Before I learned that dreams can change, can grow wider than we ever imagined." He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the concern in his eyes, the fear he was trying to hide. "Eleanor," the telegram trembled in her hands. "They're my parents, Wyatt. She taught me my first lessons in healing." And he defended. "My right to study medicine when everyone said it wasn't proper. I owe them so much. You owe yourself something too." His hand covered hers, steadying the shaking paper. "The right to choose your own path, to build something that's yours." Through the window, she saw Thomas Wheeler ride past, slowing his horse, to watch Jenny demonstrate a poultice preparation to the younger girls. His face held an expression Eleanor had never seen before, a grudging pride mixed with dawning understanding. "I've built something here," she whispered. "With the school, the clinic, with you and Emma. Then perhaps that's your answer." Wyatt's voice was gentle. "Go to your mother, help her heal, show Boston what a frontier doctor has learned about mixing medicine with compassion and practical wisdom. But know that Dry Creek will be waiting. We'll all be waiting." Mr. Collins cleared his throat. "Stage leaves for the railroad at noon, Dr. McCrae. If you're going east, best send a reply telegram now." Eleanor squared her shoulders, feeling the weight of two worlds pulling at her heart. "Yes, I need to send a reply," she wrote quickly, her words carrying the strength she'd found in this small frontier town. "Coming to help Mother stop position. Unnecessary. Stop have found my true calling. Stop will return home to Dry Creek. Stop us." Mr. Collins tapped out her message. Eleanor turned to Wyatt. "I don't know how long." "Doesn't matter." He drew her close, propriety forgotten in the face of separation. "Time's just another kind of distance. We know about handling those out." Here, the telegram lay on the counter, its eastern shadows somehow less threatening now. Eleanor had chosen her path once before, stepping off a train with dreams of marriage that had transformed into something far richer. Now she would choose again, not between East and West, but between what was expected and what was right. "I'll come back," she promised, and felt the truth of it settle in her bones like the certainty of seasons changing. "This is home now." The revealed secret lay exposed on Sarah Henderson's kitchen table, a stack of letters in Thomas Wheeler's hand, their pages yellow with age. Eleanor stared at them, understanding now why Sarah had summoned her urgently upon her return from Boston. "Found them while helping Martha Peterson clean the attic," Sarah explained, her usually cheerful face grave. "Letters Thomas wrote to his brother, Jenny's father, before he passed." Eleanor picked up the topmost letter, its contents damning. In their clarity, Thomas had deliberately sabotaged other potential suitors for his brother's wealthy widow, hoping to force a marriage that would give him control of the ranch. When she died of grief instead, he'd taken charge of Jenny's inheritance as trustee, all while corresponding with Eleanor about marriage, seeing in her another educated woman he could manipulate. "He never intended to marry me," Eleanor said, softly. "He wanted a proxy for Jenny's education, someone he could control and then discard." "There's more." Sarah's hand shook as she pushed forward a more recent letter. "He's been corresponding with a banker in Cheyenne, planning to sell Jenny's portion of the ranch before she comes of age next spring." The kitchen door opened, admitting Wyatt. His face showed the strain of the past 3 weeks, watching over both their daughters while Eleanor tended her mother in Boston. But his eyes held something that made her heart stop. "Jenny found out," he said without preamble. "Overheard Thomas talking with the banker in town. She's missing." Eleanor was already reaching for her coat, Catherine's coat, which had seen her through so many trials. The old line shack, where she and Emma practiced their reading. "Emma's gone too." Wyatt's voice was tight with worry. "Took horses and supplies. Smart girls, both of them, but there's a storm coming." Sarah gathered up the letters. "I'll take these to Sheriff Barnes. Time everyone knew the truth about Thomas Wheeler." The sky was heavy with approaching snow as Eleanor and Wyatt rode out, following tracks only his experienced eye could read. The wind carried memories of another rescue, another storm, the day she'd saved Emma's life and found her place in this community. "They're together," Wyatt said over the rising wind. "They'll look after each other. Like sisters." Eleanor smiled despite her worry. "Jenny's been staying with us more often than not these past months. Notice you said us." Wyatt's voice held warmth even through his concern. "Missed you, Eleanor. All of us did." "Mother's better," she said, understanding his unasked question. "And Father, he finally understood why I had to come back. Seeing me work with the local doctor there, watching how I combined everything. I'd learned here with my formal training. It helped him realize I'd found my true calling." The wind picked up, bringing the first flakes of snow. Eleanor pulled Catherine's coat closer, remembering another woman who dared to be different, to challenge Thomas Wheeler's view of proper womanhood. They found the girls in the line shack, huddled together near a small fire. Jenny's face was streaked with tears, but her chin held the same determination Eleanor had seen in her father's portrait. "He killed them," Jenny said as soon as they entered. "Not with his hands, but with his greed. My mother, my father, all that talk about propriety and a woman's place, when all he wanted was the ranch." "We know." Eleanor knelt beside the girls, drawing them both close. "Sarah found the letters. The sheriff has them now. The whole town will know soon," Wyatt added, building up the fire against the growing storm. "Your uncle's influence here is finished, Jenny, and come spring, you'll take your rightful place as owner of your half of the ranch." "With proper training in ranch management," Eleanor added, sharing a look with Wyatt. "If you'd like to make your home with us until then, learn from someone who knows ranching and respects education." Emma's face lit up even as Jenny's crumpled with fresh tears, of relief this time. "You mean that? Even with you just back from Boston and everything changing?" "Especially now." Eleanor gathered both girls close, feeling Wyatt's steady presence behind them. Family isn't just about blood. It's about choosing to stand together, to fight for what's right instead of what's merely proper. The storm raged outside, but inside the line shack, truth had cleared the air like spring rain. Eleanor watched Wyatt tend the fire, saw how naturally both girls leaned into his care and felt the rightness of all her choices settle into place. Besides, she added, pulling a small package from her coat pocket, I brought something from Boston for both of you. New books, advanced medical texts, and ranch management guides. Seems to me you're ready for more challenging studies. The girls' eager response, their immediate diving into the books despite cold and hunger and emotional upheaval, confirmed everything Eleanor had written to her father. She belonged here, where medicine and education and love could twine together, like strands of prairie grass, growing stronger for their combination. The train ticket to Boston lay unused on Eleanor's desk, her father's latest telegraph beside it. Mother asking for you stop hospital board. Requires immediate decision. Stop position will not remain open. Indefinitely stop through her window, she. Could see Jenny and Emma in the schoolyard, teaching younger girls the basics of wound binding. They'd taken to combining their lessons, medicine flowing naturally into mathematics, healing herbs into botany, just as Eleanor had always dreamed of teaching, though she'd never imagined it quite like this. Quite the little doctors you're training. Out there, Thomas Wheeler's voice startled her. He stood in her doorway, changed somehow since the revelation of his letters. The sheriff's investigation had left him chastened, his ranch shares returned to Jenny's control through the courts. Intervention. They're learning to take care of their community, Eleanor replied carefully. Something I believe you understand better now. He fingered his hat brim, uncomfortable. Come to say goodbye, actually. Selling my share of the ranch to Jenny. Fair price this time, heading to California. He paused, eyes falling on the train ticket. Seems I'm not the only one contemplating leaving. My mother, Eleanor began. But Thomas shook his head. Save your explanations for someone who hasn't seen what you've built here. He gestured to the schoolyard, where Sarah Henderson had joined. The girls, sharing her knowledge of traditional remedies. Took me too long to understand that fighting change just leaves you standing alone in the dust. The sound of hoofbeats drew their attention. Wyatt rode up to the schoolhouse, and Eleanor's heart did the same familiar dance it always did at his approach. He carried something long and wrapped in canvas. Think on it, Thomas said quietly, on what's worth keeping and what's worth letting go. He settled his hat and walked out, leaving Eleanor with the weight of decisions pressing down like storm clouds. Wyatt appeared in the doorway moments later, his presence filling the space Thomas had vacated. Brought you something. He propped the canvas-wrapped package against her desk. Been working on it since you came back from Boston. Eleanor unwrapped it carefully. A sign, beautifully carved and painted, read, Dr. Eleanor McCrae, physician and teacher, Dry Creek Medical School and Clinic. Wyatt. She traced the letters, feeling the care in each carved line. Town council approved it this morning, he said. Official charter for a proper medical school, teaching both traditional medicine and modern techniques. Sarah Henderson's already agreed to help teach the herbal remedies she learned from her grandmother. Eleanor looked at the train ticket on her desk, then back at the sign that represented everything she dreamed of becoming. My mother is recovering, according to your letters. Wyatt stepped closer, his voice gentle, and has a whole hospital of doctors to care for her. Here, you're building something unique, something that honors both worlds, east and west, old and new. Through the window, Jenny's voice carried clearly, remember, clean bandages are just as important as clean hands. Dr. McCrae says infection is the enemy of healing. Emma's response made Eleanor smile. And mathematics is the foundation of proper dosing. Everything connects, just like in nature. They're remarkable girls, Wyatt said softly, learning to bridge worlds just like their teacher. Eleanor picked up the train ticket, feeling its weight, not just paper, but paths chosen and paths left behind. I should send this back, only if you're sure. Wyatt's hand covered hers. I won't pretend I don't want you to stay. That Emma and Jenny don't need you. That I don't love you more than I thought possible after Catherine. His voice roughened. But this has to be your choice. Eleanor looked at the sign, at the schoolyard full of learning and hope, at the man who had helped her build this dream she'd never known she had. When I went to Boston, I thought I was torn between two worlds. But I realized something there, watching the hospital doctors with their strict procedures and separate spheres. She moved to the window, drawing Wyatt with her. Look at them. Modern medicine and frontier wisdom, book learning and practical skills all flowing together. This isn't a compromise between two worlds. It's a new world entirely, one worth building. She turned to face him fully. I choose this. All of it. The school, the clinic, the girls. Her hand found his cheek. You. Wyatt's kiss was gentle, but full of promise. When they parted, Eleanor saw Jenny and Emma watching from the schoolyard, their faces bright with joy and conspiracy. About time, Jenny called out, making Sarah Henderson laugh. Eleanor picked up her father's telegram and began composing a reply, her heart lighter than it had been in weeks. Position gratefully declined. Stop have established medical school on frontier stop, bringing modern medicine to those who need it. Most stop all my love to mother stop. The future stretched before her like the prairie in spring, full of growth and possibility. She had made her choice, and with it found her true home. The marriage license caught the morning sun, its official seal gleaming on the courthouse desk. Eleanor smiled at the simple lines that would bind her life to Wyatt's, remembering a very different document, that torn letter of introduction that had started her journey in Dry Creek. "Everything in order, Judge Patterson?" Wyatt asked, his hand warm against the small of Eleanor's back. The judge, one of Eleanor's first patients after returning from Boston, beamed at them both. "Just needs your signatures. Though I must say, Dr. McCrae, your terms are unusual." Eleanor touched the additional paper she'd drawn up, its carefully worded provisions ensuring her right to maintain both her medical practice and the school. "Times are changing, Judge. Even marriage can adapt to serve both love and purpose." "She's right about that," Sarah Henderson spoke up from her witness's chair, "though I suspect you've known that since she saved your wife's life last month." The judge chuckled, touching his wife's handwritten thank-you note, which he now kept, framed on his desk. "Indeed I have. Very well, let's make this official." As they signed, Eleanor heard the schoolhouse bell ring across the street. Jenny and Emma would be gathering their younger students now, ready to share their own growing knowledge. The medical school sign caught the same sunlight as the marriage license, both documents marking new beginnings. "Dr. McCrae?" "Martha." Peterson's worried voice carried through the courthouse door. "Sorry to interrupt, but little Timothy Watson's cough is back, and his mama's worried." "Go," Wyatt said softly, understanding in his eyes. "I'll file the license. Some things can't wait." Eleanor gathered her skirts, already reaching for the medical bag she now carried everywhere. "I'll be home for supper. Jenny's made Catherine's special stew recipe. Our home," Wyatt corrected gently, "has a nice ring to it." The word warmed her as she hurried toward the Watson ranch, remembering that desperate ride through winter storms that had helped cement her place in this community. Now spring flowers dotted the prairie, a new life burst from every corner of the territory. Timothy's cough proved minor, a spring cold rather than winter's deadly pneumonia. But Eleanor took time to show Mrs. Watson how to prepare the willowbark tea that Sarah Henderson had taught her. As she worked, she could hear her students, in the distance, practicing their lessons in the schoolyard. 3 parts willow bark to 1 part honey, Jenny's voice carried on the breeze. "And always remember to check your measurements twice." "Like Dr. McCrae says," Emma added, "medicine is science mixed with caring. You have to master both." Eleanor smiled, recognizing her own teachings transformed through her students' understanding. She'd written to her father about this, how frontier medicine was creating something new, combining formal training with practical wisdom passed down through generations. His response had surprised her. Perhaps Boston has something to learn from Dry Creek after all. Keep detailed records, Eleanor. You may be building the future of medical education out there. The future. It stretched before her now like the Wyoming prairie, vast and full of possibility. Tonight, she would go home to Wyatt, to the family they were building with Emma and Jenny. Tomorrow, she would continue building her medical school, teaching a new generation to bridge the gap between East and West, between old ways and news. Watson pressed a handful of fresh eggs into Eleanor's hands as payment, the frontier way of showing gratitude. We're blessed to have you, Dr. McCrae, though I suspect soon we'll be calling you Dr. Callahan. Eleanor McCrae Callahan. She corrected gently, a bridge between who I was and who I've become, rather like Dry Creek itself. The afternoon sun lit her way home, where Wyatt waited on their porch, watching Emma and Jenny lead their younger students through anatomy lessons, using drawings chalked on the barn door. They'd transformed the ranch into a place of both learning and healing, just as Eleanor had transformed herself from a jilted bride into something far more precious, a woman who had found her true worth. "Marriage license is filed," Wyatt said as she joined him, "though I suspect that paper's just making official what's been true for a while now." Eleanor leaned into his strength, watching their girls teach with confidence and grace. "Some things don't need papers to be true, like family, like purpose, like love," Wyatt added softly, and Eleanor heard in his voice the same certainty she'd felt signing their unconventional marriage terms. The future would hold challenges, she knew. There would be those who questioned a female doctor, a medical school on the frontier, a family built more on choice than convention. But standing there, wrapped in Wyatt's love and watching their dreams take flight through the next generation, Eleanor knew she'd found something better than the life she'd originally sought. She'd found her true calling, her true home, her true worth. And that was worth everything. The school deed spread across Eleanor's desk, its fresh ink declaring the establishment of the Dry Creek Medical Academy and Women's Teaching College. Sarah Henderson had donated her late husband's vacant storehouse, and the town council, led by a surprisingly enthusiastic Judge Patterson, had approved the expansion unanimously. "It's really happening," Jenny breathed, tracing the deed's elaborate letterhead. Now 17, she stood straight and confident, every inch the ranch owner and apprentice doctor she was becoming. A real medical school right here in Dry Creek, with a proper dormitory for students, Emma added, her eyes shining. "Just think, girls from all over the territory coming here to learn both medicine and teaching, just like we did." Eleanor smiled at their enthusiasm, remembering her own dreams of changing the world through medicine. How small those dreams seemed now, compared to what had actually grown from the seeds of rejection and determination. Dr. McCrae Callahan. Martha Peterson's voice carried a note of pride as she used Eleanor's new name. "The Ladies' Auxiliary has a proposal for you." She entered carrying a ledger, followed by several other town women. Even Thomas Wheeler's former fiancé, now happily married to a rancher who appreciated her intelligence, stood among them. "We've been taking subscriptions," Martha explained, opening the ledger. "Every family in Dry Creek contributing what they can, for scholarships, you see. So any girl with the dedication can learn, regardless of means." Eleanor blinked back unexpected tears as she saw the amounts. Small sums that represented huge sacrifices for many frontier families. Even Thomas Wheeler, before leaving for California, had contributed a substantial amount in Jenny's name. "My Catherine would have loved this," Wyatt's voice came from the doorway. He crossed to stand behind Eleanor's chair, his hand warm on her shoulder. A place where healing and teaching come together, where old wisdom meets new learning. "Speaking of which," Sarah Henderson stepped forward, "I've been corresponding with my cousin in Oklahoma Territory. She's a medicine woman of the Cherokee Nation. Says she'd be honored to come teach traditional healing methods, if you're interested." Eleanor's heart swelled at the possibilities. "The best of all worlds," she said softly. "Modern medicine, Frontier wisdom and ancient knowledge, all under one roof. And practical ranching skills too, Jenny added quickly. Can't heal people if you can't reach them, and out here that means knowing horses and weather patterns as well as anatomy. You've thought this through, Eleanor said proudly. Learn from the best. Jenny shared a smile with Emma. You taught us that knowledge doesn't have to be divided into proper and improper. It just has to be true and useful. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows of what would soon be the Academy's main hall. Eleanor could already envision the changes. The waiting room transformed into a lecture hall, the storage space converted to a practicing clinic, the upstairs rooms becoming dormitories for students from across the frontier. There's something else, Wyatt said, producing a letter from his pocket. Came from your father this morning. Eleanor opened it with slightly trembling fingers, reading aloud. My dear daughter, your latest report on combining frontier medical practices with formal training has caused quite a stir at Harvard Medical School. They've requested permission to incorporate some of your methods into their curriculum, particularly your ideas about practical application and apprenticeship. It seems Boston has something to learn from Wyoming after all. You see, Sarah beamed, you didn't have to choose between two worlds. You've built a bridge between them instead. Outside, the sound of hammering announced the beginning of renovations. The whole town had turned out to help, men and women working side by side, just as they'd learned to do during the hard winters and successful harvests. I remember when you first stepped off that train, Martha mused, so proper in your Boston clothes, looking like the wind might blow you away. None of us could have imagined. Sometimes the best dreams are the ones we don't know we have, Eleanor said, rising to stand beside Wyatt. The ones that grow from challenge and change, from letting go of what's proper to embrace what's right. Emma picked up the deed, her finger tracing the word women's with pride. And now other girls won't have to fight so hard for their dreams. They'll have a place to start from, a place to belong, Jenny added softly. Eleanor looked around at these people who had become her family. Wyatt, with his quiet strength. Emma and Jenny with their bright futures. Sarah with her blend of traditional wisdom and progressive thinking. Martha and the other town women who had moved from opposition to support. Each one had contributed to building something larger than any single dream. Well then, she said, straightening her doctor's bag out of habit, shall we begin the next chapter? The future stretched before them like the Wyoming prairie in spring, rich with possibility and promise. And Eleanor knew that whatever challenges it held, they would face them together, healing bodies and minds, building bridges between worlds, creating something new and wonderful on the foundation of love, learning, and acceptance they'd built. Together, the family portrait sat in pride of place on Eleanor's office wall, captured 1 year after the Dry Creek Medical Academy's opening. The photographer had arranged them on the school's front steps. Eleanor and Wyatt in the center, Emma and Jenny flanking them in their apprentice doctor's aprons. But it was the group of young women behind them, the Academy's first class of students, that truly told the story of how far they'd come. Hard to believe it's been a year already, Sarah Henderson said, setting a fresh cup of tea on Eleanor's desk. They'd just finished teaching their joint class on integrating traditional remedies with modern medical techniques. Seems like only yesterday we were fighting just to let girls learn their letters. Eleanor touched the portrait's silver frame, remembering another photograph, Catherine's, that had helped bridge past and present. Sometimes I think we've dreamed too big, she admitted. Training women to be both doctors and teachers, combining so many different traditions. Nonsense, Sarah interrupted firmly. Just this morning, I watched Jenny diagnose a sick calf while teaching arithmetic to Randy Peterson's daughters. And last week, Emma delivered her first baby while explaining the process to 3 apprentices. They're living proof that we dreamed. Exactly big enough. Through the window, Eleanor could see her students scattered across the academy grounds. Some practiced bandaging techniques, while others discussed anatomy over their lunch breaks. In the herb garden, a Cherokee medicine woman, Sarah's cousin, demonstrated proper harvesting techniques while explaining each plant's traditional uses. The door opened, admitting Wyatt with his usual quiet strength. "Thought you'd want to see this." He handed Eleanor a letter bearing Harvard Medical School's seal. Came on the morning stage. Eleanor read it aloud. "Dear Dr. McCrae Callahan, your latest paper on integrating practical frontier medicine with formal medical training has impressed our board significantly. We would be honored to have you deliver a series of lectures next spring on your innovative teaching methods. Boston calling you back again?" Wyatt's voice held no worry now, just quiet pride. "Only to learn from us this time." Eleanor smiled, setting the letter aside. "Though I think Jenny and Emma are more than ready to run things while I'm gone. They've grown so much this past year." As if summoned by their names, both girls, young women now, appeared in the doorway, their apprentice aprons bearing the fresh stains of honest work. "Mrs. Watson's twins are doing fine," Jenny reported. "We showed the students how to check for breathing complications, just like you taught us during Timothy's pneumonia. And I've updated all the patient records," Emma added, "including the cross-references to traditional treatments Sarah's been teaching us. The new students are amazed by how much territory medicine has to offer the modern world." Eleanor looked at their bright faces, seeing in them the future she'd never known she was building when she first stepped off that train. Jenny, who would inherit her father's full ranch share next month, had already drawn up plans to use part of the land for medicinal herb cultivation. Emma had started corresponding with medical schools across the country, sharing their unique approach to integrated learning. "Oh, and Thomas Wheeler sent another letter," Jenny said, pulling an envelope from her pocket. "He's doing well in California, says he's recommended our academy to several families there. Seems he's finally made peace with educated women." "Speaking of education," Wyatt drawled, "don't you two have an anatomy class to teach?" The girls, women, hurried off, their voices carrying back through the open door as they discussed lesson plans and patient care with equal enthusiasm. Eleanor watched them go, remembering two younger girls studying a primer beneath an oak tree. "We did dream big enough," she said softly, "but more importantly, we dreamed true." Sarah gathered her herbs for the afternoon lesson, pausing at the door. "You know, when Henry was alive, he used to say that medicine is like ranching. You have to work with nature, not against it. What you've built here, Eleanor, it works with human nature, combines all the kinds of healing people need." Through the window, Eleanor watched her students move between classes. They carried medical texts alongside ranching manuals, discussed herb lore while practicing modern surgical techniques. Young women from across the territory, each one carrying her own dreams of healing and teaching, of building bridges between worlds. Wyatt's hand found hers, warm and sure as the day he'd first defended her right to teach, ready for the afternoon. "Rounds, Dr. McCrae Callahan?" Eleanor picked up her medical bag, the same one she'd carried off the train that first day, now worn smooth with use and purpose. The family portrait caught the afternoon light, reminding her of everything they'd built together, a school, a clinic, a family, a future. "You know," she said, "I believe I am. After all, there are always new horizons to explore, new bridges to build, and new dreams to dream." Wyatt smiled. "No," Eleanor said softly, thinking of all the dreams she'd never known to want before love. And rejection had brought her to this place. "These dreams are exactly right, exactly big enough. They're the dreams we built together." Hand in hand, they stepped out into the afternoon sun, ready to continue the work they'd begun, healing bodies, teaching minds, and building a future where every dream had room to grow.